Okay, so I was just saying to Abby on the front row there, she said, how are you feeling? I said, I'm not sure really, because I'm not sure I've got a message for this morning. And for those of you who don't know, I'm Stuart, I'm one of the senior leaders here, and I am the senior leader here. I got told off for saying one of the senior leaders. I am the senior leader of Catch the Fire, and it's not unusual for me to not know 100% where I'm going with a talk. That's quite common, but to only have one point and not a lot else is a little bit unusual, and so I'm going to be sort of just seeing where it goes today, this morning. But I've been really struck. We've been at a conference this week with the Bethel family. For those of you who know, Bill Johnson, he was there, Eric Johnson, Heidi Baker was there, Randy Clark was there, Paul Manwaring was there, and there was a whole bunch of others, and we were there just receiving and chatting with all those people. And they took up an offering for our Kenyan project. For those of you who don't know, we've literally started building a village in Western Kenya, which is really exciting. If you want details about that, talk to Dan Graham, one of our directors. He can give you information about our village that we're building in Kenya. And Chloe Flint, come here. She loves the attention. This is Chloe's last Sunday with us before she disappears off back to Australia for a season, and we have no idea what that season looks like at the moment. So for those of you who don't know, Chloe came and interned with us 3 years ago? Ish. Nearly 3 years ago, and then stayed on junior staff and has been really instrumental in helping us with all of our conferences and all the other stuff that we do. And God's calling her back to go to Australia again, and going to be working with a whole bunch of business objectives and a whole bunch of stuff like that, but also has a real heart of mission. And so we're just really excited. She sent a little season out in Kenya as well, and so she has just been such a blessing to us. And what I love about the last 3 years is that she's just become a daughter to so many people in this house. And we're really proud of her. She was very...
Remember who you're talking to, Stu.
Australian when she first came. She's still very Australian, but no, she's absolutely become a daughter, and we absolutely love her. And so I just wanted to honour her. We're going to be praying for her big time. Are you coming tonight? Yeah, we're going to be praying for her big time tonight, but I wanted to get her up because she loves people looking at her and she loves the attention. And no, she's just been such a blessing to us that if you're not here tonight, you need to know that we honour her, and we are sending her back to Australia with a huge bounty sack full of blessings, revelation, testimonies of healing, testimonies of breakthrough, testimonies of what God has done in her life and through her life. She's one of the most prophetic people in our team. She's got an incredible ability to hear the voice of God, and she's done an awesome work for us in Kenya as well. And so we just want to honour her, and we bless her as a daughter. I didn't do that just because I haven't got a message. I did that because I just saw her and I thought, hang on a minute. And that's going to be on the podcast as well. You're going to be famous throughout the world, Chloe Flint. You look so excited by that. So we were at this conference, and they did an offering for KCP, our Kenyan project, which is awesome. They got £15,000 towards our new village, which is amazing. We're really excited by that. And whilst we're there, Heidi was preaching. Heidi Baker, for those of you who don't know Heidi, she and her husband Roland, they run a big charity called Iris Ministries, and they have, I don't know, no one can really count them. I don't think even Iris know how many churches they've got, but it's somewhere 10, 11,000 of them throughout mainly Southeast Africa, Mozambique, Malawi, and are spreading all across there. Some of their pastors actually get killed on a regular basis. They have people who are killed regularly because of their faith in Africa. And so it's an extreme mission organization, and we've got some people from our family who are going out there for their harvest school, and we got really, really close with Heidi and Roland, and we speak to them on a regular basis. And anyway, she started to preach. And as she does, if you've ever seen Heidi preach, she got on her knees and she just worshipped for the first, 20, 25 minutes of her allotted time. And something sparked inside of me because I'd been on the rota for today preaching is the idea of abundance. And if you want to come John 21 with me, and then hopefully all of this will slot together at some point. Book of John's in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Chapter 21, starting at verse 1. After Jesus appeared to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael, from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, two other disciples were together. How's that for your sonship? I mean, because we're a congregation who believe in the Father heart of God, and we believe that the Father loves us so much that we have security and identity in that love, which means that we never need to be kind of worried about what other people think. We never to be kind of feeling neglected, feeling abandoned. But how would you like to be one of the two other disciples that didn't even get named? Let's read that again. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples. How would you feel if for all eternity you never got a name drop, you just got to be one of the two other disciples? We're together. Verse 3, I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment round him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens. I wanted to focus on this idea. So this was the verse in our rota. We're looking at miracles of Jesus and what can we learn about the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit through the miracles of Jesus. And this was the one for today. And both Chloe and I are preaching on this today. The thing that really stuck out to me was him saying, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. And God started to speak to me about abundance. And as I was thinking about the idea of abundance, because Jesus says, you've been working all night, absolutely nothing to show for it. And Jesus says, do it again. What would you do? The disciples, obviously, they obeyed and they found all of this fish and it just went. You know, Heidi Baker, who we were listening to, and this is kind of what sparked this angle of this talk off this week. I was listening to Heidi, and she said a testimony that I've probably heard 40, 50 times, which was her kind of journey into the abundance of God started when a guy called Randy Clark prayed for her in a church called Catch the Fire Toronto. That's obviously our mother church, for those of you who don't know. And Randy prayed for Heidi, and he said, Heidi, and at this point, she had two, as she would put, flaky churches. She hadn't seen any miracles, and she had a few kids in her home, and that was it. She was burnt out, she was depressed, she was exhausted, and she wanted to give up. Someone paid for her to go to Toronto, and in that moment, Randy Clark was speaking, and he said, Heidi, do you want Mozambique? Now, the natural part of Heidi is wanting to say, I've been in Mozambique for years. I've been working my socks off. I've been striving and straining, and I've been really exhausted, and nothing's really gone right, and our churches are rubbish, and we've got a few kids, but they're a nightmare, and it's just exhausting, and I hate my life. And, you know, that was her natural part, was like, I've been in Mozambique. But Randy said it with an authority that she recognized was the voice of God. Do you want Mozambique? And she turned around and she said, yes, I want Mozambique. So he slapped his big hand on her head, and she ended up demolished on the floor for a number of hours, and that was her gone. She kind of woke up, stood up from that encounter after a few hours, went back to Mozambique. Now they have thousands of churches, tens of thousands of churches, and they have tens of thousands of children, and she's not always easy, but from that moment, abundance happened in her life. Do you want something that you've been striving and straining for and nothing's happened? She'd been fishing. At that point, she'd never seen any miracles. She'd never seen any blind eyes open. From that moment, she had faith that rose up and she prayed for blind people and nothing happened. Within the course of a year, she reckons around 1,000 blind people were prayed for by her husband, and their senior team, and nothing happened. And then, after about a year, the first blind person saw. And since then, they've seen hundreds of thousands of blind people supernaturally healed because she threw the net in one more time. She didn't give up in the moment that most people would give up. She wanted to give up, but she recognized the voice of God in that moment, and she responded to the voice of God. There's some people in this room who have really stuck at it with God. They've really tried. You may have prayed for something 1,000 times, 10,000 times. You may have pushed in. You may have been fishing all night. You may have prayed for the sick a lot. You know, we've had prophetic words over my and my wife Chloe's life that we're going to see the dead raised. We've prayed for dead people. We've not seen the breakthrough that we're expecting. So what's the options? What was the option for our friend of this ministry, Bill Johnson, when his dad died from cancer? He said this week in one of his preaches, he used the disappointment of not seeing his dad raised, not seeing his dad healed, not seeing his dad raised, as fuel to push on another step. And now they're famous around the world for seeing cancer healed. What do you do with the disappointment? What do you do when you've been fishing all night and seen nothing? We have some of this in our life. You know, some people, because we talk a lot about testimony, some people think that every time we kind of talk, we see the breakthrough. Every time we pray, we see the healing. Every time we dream, we get the funding. It can come across in an environment like ours that nothing ever goes wrong. But you need to understand that there's something different about the people in this church. And some people are there, some people are getting there. None of us are fully there, but some people are learning, some people are growing. But there's something different about this culture. And this is what I wanted to kind of center down on. We push in the extra step. Now, you need to understand that to build a culture of pushing in the extra step means that it doesn't always happen on the first step. Otherwise, you wouldn't need a culture of the extra step. Sorry to state the obvious. To learn perseverance, you need to have answers to prayer that don't make sense. To learn perseverance, you have to hear nothing at times, no at times, wait at times. To learn that extra step, to learn the perseverance that God insists on in the Bible, you have to have periods of waiting in your life. We're going, Chloe and I and a whole team of people, we're going to Pittsburgh on Tuesday to Bishop Joseph Garlington and his church and train some of their leaders, and that's awesome. Then we're going to Colombia to see the Catch the Fire church over in Colombia. So we've got an amazing trip just in these next 2 weeks, which is awesome. Bishop Joseph Garlington preached a message back in 2007 that we had the privilege of hearing, and his message was entitled, "It's Hell in the Hallway." And in that message, he talked about the fact that sometimes a door shuts to one room, but the door to the next room hasn't opened yet. That there's this period often in our lives when there's a waiting period. There's a period where nothing seems to be happening. You haven't got through to the promised land. You haven't got the breakthrough. You haven't got the healing. You haven't got the financial resources. You haven't got whatever it is you're persevering for. But by definition, perseverance means you may need to wait at times. Sometimes you need to fish all night and get nothing before you fill your net in an instant. That's the culture we're trying to build here. A culture of pressing in. You know, Chloe preaches a lot, and when she preaches, she'll often include the sentence, when you think it's time to finish worshiping, it's probably time to start. And sometimes you come to this church and it's like we've forgotten to press the off switch. when worship starts to move and worship starts to flow. And sometimes you may not feel it. Sometimes you may not understand it. Sometimes you're like, why is Matt still singing? I'm just done. And sometimes when you feel done is the time to activate your faith. Sometimes when you're worshiping and you get into the 50th, the 60th, or the 70th minute, and you feel a bit tired and you feel like it's time to stop, sometimes that's you fishing all night. Sometimes that's the moment to say, I choose to worship. Sometimes we're praying for the sick and we're not seeing a breakthrough. Sometimes we don't get to see the answer to the prayer that we want to see in this situation, but we don't stop praying. We don't stop. It was that song, wasn't it? We love you and we'll never stop. We love you and we'll never stop. And as we're singing that song, I'm thinking, all right, that applies to we love you and we'll never stop loving you. But it also applies to we love you. And because of that love, we're not going to stop fishing. Because of that love, we're not going to stop worshiping. Because of that love, we're not going to stop praying. Because of that love, we're not going to stop believing. Because of that love, we are going to press in. We are going to activate something that's beyond the feeling bit, beyond the I can be bothered bit, beyond the it's convenient bit, and into the realm of sacrifice. I love what Shanice was saying about the offering. It's like, it is a sacrifice. You know, some people actually don't realize that every time you give anything, it's a sacrifice, because you could spend whatever it is, energy, time, money, resources, prayer, whatever it may be, love, grace, mercy, forgiveness. You don't need to spend that. So every time you do that, it's a sacrifice. The difference is whether or not you're willing to sacrifice from comfort or whether you're willing to sacrifice from pain. Like I said, if someone gave us £5 million and they were one of the billionaires that I've been speaking to in the last few weeks, it would still be a sacrifice. It'd just be a sacrifice from a place of comfort. The question is, are we willing to push in that extra step, to persevere the extra moment, to hunker down and say, you know, I was looking this week, and one of the things that came up to me was Jacob. Genesis 32, verse 22. You don't need to turn there. Basically, the story is Jacob moves across a river and he ends up being visited by a man. And the man wants to move on, but Jacob basically wrestles him. Have you read this one? And the inference is that he didn't realize it was God that he was wrestling with until he names the place afterwards. And so the inference is that he didn't realize it was God he was wrestling with, but he knew there was a blessing in that moment. So he didn't even have the full revelation. He didn't have the full information, and yet Jacob wrestles with the man and ends up the man realizes he's not going to beat Jacob in this thing, which is weird theology. Anyone ever read that bit and thought, hang on, if this is God or even an angel, depending on your theology, either way, I'm guessing they could probably defeat a man in a wrestle. How many people think God could beat a man in a wrestle? I think God could, but there's something in that dynamic where the perseverance of Jacob overcame the strength of Jacob, and it was the perseverance of Jacob in that moment, the dogged determination of Jacob in that moment, that actually almost defeats God. That teaches me something. It's not about your strength. It's not about the resources you have. It's about the heart that comes out and the heart of which those resources are built on. Hannah's come back from IHOP, the International House of Prayer. They can really teach you to pray over there. They can really teach you that when you feel like you're bored and you've got nothing left to say, that's when you should probably start praying. There's something about the heart of perseverance. It's not about the power, because Jacob clearly could have been demolished in a second by God. He could have been annihilated, incinerated by God in a second. But there was something about the heart of Jacob which won. There was something about the determination and the perseverance of Jacob that says, God says, I'm defeated by this. Now, obviously, he's not defeated. Obviously, he's not overpowered by Jacob, but there's something in the heart that says, I'm not going to give up here. And then he gets the hip problem. Have you read it? It's in the Bible. God is calling us as a house to step in that extra step, to persevere that extra moment. Some of you are in situations and they're terrible situations, but God's just asking, will you stay with me during this situation? Will you persevere? Will you be determined? Will you have a heart like Jacob? The fishermen fished all night and got not a single fish. Key number 1, are you going to persevere? Key number 2, are you going to be obedient in the moment? It would be really easy to... How many people have tried rationalizing with God? They're fishing all night, and then a guy they don't recognize as Jesus, which pickles my head again. I'm just like, what? Was it that misty that no? It didn't mention... They didn't recognize that Jesus was the one speaking to them on the shore, close enough for them to be able to actually hear him in a potentially windy place in the world. Anyway, perseverance is one thing, but obedience is another. When God says, one more. When he says, carry on. When he says, keep praying. When he says, keep worshiping. When he says, stay the course. When he says something, our inbuilt reaction is, that doesn't make sense. Our inbuilt humanness says, I'm going to rationalize this away. This doesn't make sense. There must be another way. I must be mishearing what God is saying. I was thinking about some of the stories in the Bible, like Jericho. How many people would have loved to have been Joshua, hearing from God, here's the strategy to take down this city. I want you to send the worship team out, going to circle around the city, and then at the end of the 7th time, you're going to shout. That's my strategy. What about Gideon? How many men have you got? Way too many. We're going to halve it, and then we're going to halve it, and then we're going to halve it, and then we're going to halve it. Oh yeah, this is about the right amount of people to win this battle. This is the army that I want, the 300 as opposed to the 6,000 that you started with. God's logic sometimes doesn't make sense. I've got so many stories going through my head at the moment of times that Chloe and I, Tom and Abby, and the rest of the leadership have, really, God? When we first started this church, we were told by very good church planting consultant type people, this is how you should do it. You always start in the morning, because then you get families. You need to start your youth group straight away, because it's the parents of the youth group who will pay for the church. You need to have an outreach in the local community straight away. They said you shouldn't leave your new church plant on a Sunday for the first 2 years to get some consistency in the congregation so people trust that you're going to be with them. We didn't obey a single thing that the consultants told us to do. Why? Because God said. And sometimes we would say, why are you doing it? Because we started with an evening congregation for 6.5 years. Why are you doing an evening congregation? People still ask me, why did you start with an evening congregation? Because God told us to. Yeah. No, obviously. But why did you start with an evening congregation? No, really, because God told us to. Now, there were some practical benefits from starting in an evening congregation, especially for the team who got to lie in on a Sunday. That was amazing. But the reason that we did an evening congregation was because God told us to. The reason that we didn't have children's work for a number of years was because God didn't release us to. We tried it once because an amazing woman of God came up and she wanted to start our children's work, and because she offered, we said yes. It didn't work, even though she's had the best content and curriculum you could probably ever have for a children's work. Janine, she was amazing. But because Janine came in with it, as opposed to God saying, it just didn't work. It didn't fly. What's going on? Obedience, even against logic. And the first thing we did, for those of you who've been here, you'll know this journey. So we're evening congregation, God's saying, and then we felt like an open door. There was a change in the way that we were receiving from God. And also we had a whole bunch of people who were starting to get kids, and 6 o'clock in an evening was really inconvenient for them. And so we started, some of you will remember it, the 4:30 service. The 4:30 service was very interesting. We had it for an hour. We had worship. We had notices, we had potential for hosting the presence of God after the worship, like Kamiko was doing, and then Shanice carried on a little bit. That area of the service where you're just kind of focused on God and you're activating or you're applying what God has been saying in the period of worship beforehand. And then we had a preach, and then we had ministry time, all in an hour. It was a nightmare. There came a leadership team meeting. We all got together, and I think Chloe was the one who asked the question, does anyone here actually like going to the 4:30 service? And we realized none of the leadership team liked the 4:30 service. What was wrong? Going back to the first point, the 4:30 service created an opportunity of convenience. And it was building a culture which is the opposite of Catch the Fire's culture. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you haven't got 4 hours to worship. But if God said right now, in this moment, at 17 minutes past 12, it's time to worship, how would you compute that? Well, there's some in the team who would be thinking, we've got to be out by 1. Because that's where the booking stops. There's some people in the room who be like, oh, but my roast potatoes will burn. There's some people in the room, but what about? Now, don't get me wrong, we're planning on finish in 13 minutes' time. But if God said it's time to throw the net one more time, how would you respond? When 3 weeks ago in the evening service, and we had an amazing worship time, and God really came, and then Chloe came up and she did some hosting, and that took us to about quarter to 8 it would have been, and probably quarter to 8, and then we had some notices, and then we had the offering, and we're getting close to sort of 8 o'clock, and everyone's feeling a bit twitchy, and then Chloe comes and preaches, and she preaches for an hour. But it wasn't really a preach, it was an encounter, and she's worshiping, and the team are up again, and there's stuff, and people are getting healed, and people are having breakthrough, and people are on the floor in tears, and some people are over there being pastored, and the ministry team's circling, and what do you do with that? Because it's really inconvenient. If God says throw the net one more time, are you willing to be inconvenienced so that you can receive your breakthrough? Are you willing to be inconvenienced? Are you willing to firstly, obedience? Now, don't get me wrong, we got into a place where we were worshiping for 3 hours because that's what we did. That's just another form of religion. That's not okay either. That's not obedience. But there's something about, God, what do you want to do right now? Will you be obedient to the call of God on your life? Sometimes you won't even recognize. Do you know what's really interesting? They didn't recognize it was Jesus until the miracle had happened. Some random guy said, throw your net in one more time. And they did it. They got the miracle. And then John the Beloved says, 'tis the Lord. Are you willing to be inconvenienced even if you don't recognize it to be Jesus before the moment? Are you willing to persevere? Are you willing to be determined and to hold that heart of Jacob which says, I will not let you go until I get my blessing. I will not. I'm not talking about long services. We're going to finish on time. That's not the point. The point is the heart that says, if God says, if Tom turns up and says, I feel like we need to worship again, we'll suck up the fact that we'll pay for a few more hours of rental for the building. It's time to worship again. Or what about if Abby turns up and says, I feel in the spirit that we're supposed to be spending another hour, but outside church, on the streets, welcoming every person that walks past. Would you persevere before you've even recognized that it's Jesus talking? Would you persevere when you do recognize it's Jesus talking? Some people think we're crazy in this church. we are a really abnormal church because we wait and we worship and we pray that extra step. And we don't always get it right. Sometimes it wasn't Jesus at the shore, it was just some guy. Sometimes we're not sure it's Jesus, but we feel it might be Jesus, therefore we're willing to risk. We're willing to risk another prayer. We're willing to risk another song. We're willing to risk another aspect of our life in worship. Listen to this. The tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell was a journalist for the Washington Post and later became a staff member for the New Yorker. In December of 1996, he published an article on the idea of a tipping point, the moment when a social trend crosses a threshold and starts to spread like wildfire. The original article was expanded into a book. How does a style of clothing become trendy? What causes a sudden drop in the crime rate in a major city? Under what circumstances can a political cause explode into a revolutionary mass movement? Why do some advertisements stick in people's mind while others are ignored? How does a book become a bestseller? Hush Puppy shoes went out of fashion in the 80s. In the 1990s, they dropped to about 30,000 pairs per year. However, in 1995, Hush Puppies became local fad among a young group of people in Manhattan. Subsequently, a tipping point was reached. Fashion designers decided to incorporate the shoes in their fall showings, and by the end of the year, over 400,000 pairs were sold. In 1996, 1 million pairs. 1997, 2 million pairs. All this happened by word of mouth. There's something called a tipping point, and our friend Bishop Joseph Garlington did a song about it. One more hallelujah, one more praise the Lord, one more thank you, Jesus, could be your tipping point. Are you willing to have a heart of desperation and determination that is the holding point for a breakthrough? Are you willing to wrestle God for your blessing? Are you willing to stay one more minute? Are you willing to sacrifice a meeting? Are you willing to be late for something that you treasure? Are you willing to put the extra mile in on a day off? Are you willing to give that extra pound? Are you willing to sing that extra song? This is a community that's growing, but we are aiming to build a culture where nothing is too much when it comes to God, where we say yes, even when we're not sure it's Him, when we say yes to praying an extra prayer. Why don't you stand? I felt we need to worship because we've done a lot of that already. I felt we needed to push in with prayer and with tongues and with worship. And the problem is, I'm going to make it inconvenient for you by not letting Matt come up. I'm going to make it a little bit harder, and I believe God wants to look at your heart right now. I believe He's waiting for something to rise up within you that isn't led by the phenomenal worship team, that isn't pushed by that moment of emotionality or that moment of what a great chord that was, or that moment of, man, Kate's got an amazing voice. But actually what stimulates your heart to actually respond to Him right now is something in His heart, not something in your surroundings. Because your surroundings are not always going to be conducive to pushing in. Your surroundings are not always going to make you feel good to worship. Your surroundings are not always going to be what you so-called need to find God. Your surroundings are often going to be filled with the demonic, filled with the world, filled with people who are angry, broken, lost, and discouraged. And you need to be able to find your voice in that moment. So I'm going to encourage you. to pray right now. If you have the gift of tongues, that would be a great place to start. If you don't, this would be a great time to receive the gift of tongues. We just release the gift of tongues into this room right now. We release that persevering heart. We release the determination of the soul, which says that he is worthy. Even when I don't know what words to pray, I still fix my eyes on him. I choose right now to respond to the love of God because he is awesome, because he is worthy, and because he is worthy of my inconvenience right now. He's worthy of me not understanding what's happening in the room, but I will focus my eyes on him regardless. Jesus Christ of Nazareth, you are worthy of this moment, and you are worthy of my words. You are so beautiful, and it's your beauty that attracts our heart and our adoration and our devotion. It's your awesomeness, your power that causes us to fix our eyes on you. And if you're not used to this environment, don't worry about it. God is used to it. He is used to the praises of his people being lifted up, and therefore it's just between you and him right now. It's not about anyone else in the room. You can sing, you can dance, you can speak in tongues, you can sing in tongues, you can move, you can bang, you can clap, you can do whatever it is that's your extra step. It's about you going that extra mile. It's about you persevering. It's about you pressing in. I want to encourage you, for the love of mercy, don't stop right now. Whatever it takes, just push in that extra step, because he is worthy of your attention right now. He is worthy. But I'm tired. Jesus was tired on the cross. But I feel stupid. Jesus was humiliated on the cross. And don't be deflected by anyone else in the room. Just fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of your faith. But my voice isn't worthy of the worship team. He's not looking for you to join the worship team right now. He's looking for you to worship him right now. Just extend your heart to him right now. Extend your heart to him right now. Prove to yourself that he is worthy. Respond to the love that was expressed through the cross of Christ. We've had communion this morning, a demonstration of his worth, a demonstration of his love, a demonstration of his forgiveness and his grace and his mercy, his adoration for you. He is worthy of this moment in your hearts. He is worthy of your adoration right now. And if you're stuck, ask for the gift of tongues. But if you don't yet have the gift of tongues, then just say, I love you. He will never tire from hearing, I love you. He will never tire from hearing the affection of your heart and the movement of your soul towards him. He is desperate for your focus right now. And some of you are like, I've been fishing all night. Throw the net in one more time. Throw the net in one more time. Because he's worthy. This moment is not about you. It's about him and your response to him. Sometimes it's more about the noise than it is about the content. Sometimes it's about the heart behind than it is about the product. He's more interested in the direction of your gaze than he is in the tone of your voice.
You are all things. You deserve the glory. I'm singing the harmony. You're worthy of it all. You're worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You're worthy of it all. You're worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory. You are worthy of it all. You are worthy of it all. For from you are all things, and to you are all things. You deserve the glory.
Father, would you impart to every person in this room the capacity for endurance and the capacity to stand when all else has happened, to stand. Would you give us the power from heaven not to just survive, but that you would give us supernatural power to go to a new level, that we would press in and that we would be refreshed because of our endurance. When you empower us, God, everything changes. And Father, with people who have struggled and tried, would you right now release a gift of energy? Would you ignite a supernatural fire in the soul of every person who needs it right now? That it doesn't matter what's happening on the outside, that burning happens on the inside. And would you, God, release what every person needs? If that's you, if you need an impartation of endurance, of energizing, of power, where you know that when you're worshiping, you back off. When you're praying, you run out of words. When you're struggling, that you feel like giving up. Or if you're in that place where you feel desperate right now. But this is for everyone, really. If you feel desperate, or you know that when it's time to step up, you don't. You just, world, circumstances, family, work, or life just prevents you from stepping out of that convenient place. And I want you to come to the front, and Hannah Jack's going to come and give an impartation to every person that comes forward, because I've seen that girl pray. And so if that's you, if you want an impartation of stepping out of the comfort zone and going to that place that sometimes hurts in God. And I don't mean about suffering. I'm talking about sacrifice of praise, a sacrifice of worship. then Hannah's going to come and give an impartation to every single person that would like to receive it. If you're new to us, an impartation means Hannah laying her hands on your outstretched hand in front of you so that she can release what God has given to her. Go for it, Hannah. And we're going to start to finish now. If your child is not in the room, then you need to go and find them, because the children's team won't release the kids until they're signed out, so you need to kind of take them back. You're not allowed to leave them with us. When Hannah first went to IHOP, she could pray for a couple of minutes. When she came back, she could pray for hours. There's that difference, that supernatural impartation of being able to step up and step in and push in and press in and persevere when everyone in the world wants to back away, when everyone thinks it's time to stop, that we get to push in and we get to love him out of a place of discomfort. Danji, why don't you go with your fiancé? If you're not used to this culture, don't worry about the bodies. As we always say, God's power raised Jesus from the dead. And if you stuck your finger into 240-volt plug socket, your body would move. Imagine the power that raises people from the dead touching your body. Sometimes your body responds to it. For every person in the room, God, would you take us to a new level? We are a culture that doesn't stop. We are unstoppable because he is unstoppable. He releases energy, power, perseverance, and determination. He gives us that ability to hold on tight and never let go. And that's what we're receiving from him right now. That's what we're receiving.